On the night of June 29, 1967, on a dark highway outside New Orleans, a car carrying Jayne Mansfield and 3 of her children slammed into the back of a semi-truck, and in the wreckage that followed 3 adults died instantly, and a 3-year-old girl in the back seat woke up to a world without her mother in it. That little girl's name was Mariska Hargitay, and for 30 years she refused to look, refused to search, refused to open the box that contained the real story of the woman she had lost before she was old enough to know her. Because Jayne Mansfield had spent her whole life being misunderstood, misrepresented, reduced to a punchline by an industry that used her up and then discarded her. And Mariska was terrified that looking too closely would only show her more of the same, more of the blonde bombshell, more of the dumb blonde stereotype, more of the woman Hollywood had decided she was, instead of the woman she actually was. And then in 2025, Mariska Hargitay finally looked. She made a documentary. She sat down with her siblings. She confronted the people who had known her mother and told stories about her that felt wrong, and what she found was so much more complicated and so much more human and so much more heartbreaking than anything Hollywood had ever told us. Her real name was Vera Jane Palmer, and she was born on April 19, 1933, in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, the only child of Herbert and Vera Palmer. And the first thing that happened to Jayne Mansfield that shaped everything that came after was something she had no control over at all. She endured a childhood tragedy at the age of 3 when her father died of a heart attack while driving with the family, and so Jayne Mansfield, who would one day be called the most photographed woman in America, began her life in the back seat of a car, watching her father die, and perhaps that is why she spent the rest of her life so desperately hungry for attention, for love, for someone to look at her and see something worth staying for. She was eager to be in Hollywood like her idol Shirley Temple, and took lessons in ballroom dancing, violin, piano, and viola, as well as Spanish and German. She was building herself from the ground up, learning every skill that might make her remarkable, and she was remarkable. She studied dramatics at Southern Methodist University, the University of Texas, and the University of California at Los Angeles. She was intelligent, ambitious, and absolutely certain that Hollywood was waiting for her. She just didn't know yet what Hollywood would cost her to get there. At 16 years old, Jayne Palmer met Paul Mansfield at a Christmas Eve party, and within weeks they had married secretly. And within months she was pregnant, and this is the part of Jayne Mansfield's story that gets left out of the glamorous version. Some sources say that her pregnancy resulted from date rape. So the woman who would one day be called the most photographed woman in America may have begun her journey toward motherhood in the most painful way imaginable, and she did what survivors do. She kept moving. She graduated high school. She had her daughter, Jane Marie. She studied drama while her husband was deployed to the Korean War. And when he came back and they moved to Hollywood, she pursued her dream with a ferocity that made everyone around her feel slightly exhausted. Her 1955 appearance as the Playmate of the Month not only increased subscriptions but also launched her career, as Warner Bros. Took notice and offered Mansfield a 7-year contract. And for one brief shining moment it looked like Jayne Mansfield was going to get everything she had worked for, and then she exploded. In just 9 months, from September 1956 to May 1957, Mansfield reportedly appeared in an astonishing 2,500 newspaper photos, 2,500. In 9 months, she was everywhere. On every magazine cover, in every gossip column, photographed at every party, at every premiere, at every public moment she could manufacture. Because Jayne Mansfield understood something that most actors of her era did not. That fame was a machine that needed to be fed constantly, and she was willing to feed it. Mansfield was promoted as an easier-to-work-with version of Marilyn Monroe, in part because executives wanted to anger Monroe enough to return to the studio, so from the very beginning Jayne Mansfield was being used. not celebrated, not nurtured, used as a weapon against another woman, as leverage in a studio negotiation, as a prop in someone else's story, and Marilyn Monroe knew it. Monroe complained about Mansfield and said she was imitating her but doing it grossly and vulgarly, and she wished she had some legal means to sue her. Two women, pitted against each other by the same industry that would eventually discard them both, but here is what nobody talks about when they talk about Jayne Mansfield, the thing that gets buried under all the pink and the platinum and the publicity stunts. She was extraordinary. Not just as a performer, but as a human being. She spoke multiple languages. She played violin and piano at a professional level. On the Ed Sullivan Show, she showed off her violin and piano playing. She had studied drama at 3 different universities. And she had a genuine gift for comedy that critics noticed even when the studios refused to develop it. In the new biographical dictionary of film, David Thompson writes, "Because Jayne Mansfield was widely laughed at, it is now assumed that she was happy to deride her own comic book glory. There is no evidence for or against that wishful thinking, but some to suggest that there was an actress trying to escape." An actress trying to escape, those 4 words contain the entire tragedy of Jayne Mansfield's career. She did have a real talent for acting, but the movie executives insisted that she stay in her dumb blonde stereotype roles, and so the violin player, the language student, the woman who could make an audience laugh with genuine wit and timing, was told again and again to stand still, look pretty, and not say anything too complicated, and then the fall came. The way it always comes for women in Hollywood who are valued only for what they look like. By 1962, she was dropped from 20th Century Fox, and the rest of her career had smaller options like being in B-movies and low-budget movies or performing at food stores or small nightclubs, and this is the image that gets left out of the Jayne Mansfield story. The woman who had appeared in 2,500 newspaper photographs in 9 months, performing at food stores. The woman who had been on the cover of every magazine in America playing small nightclubs to pay the bills, and she had 5 children by now. From 3 different marriages, and the last man in her life was a lawyer named Sam Brody, who her friends said was controlling and dangerous, and who her children remembered with fear, and through all of it she kept going. She kept performing. She kept showing up. Because Jayne Mansfield had learned at the age of 3, watching her father die, that the world does not pause for your grief. That the show continues whether you are ready or not, and so she continued on. The night of June 29, 1967, Jayne Mansfield was traveling to New Orleans for a television appearance. She was in a car with Sam Brody and her driver Ronnie Harrison, and 3 of her children, Mickey, Zoltan, and Mariska, were asleep in the back seat. And at around 2 in the morning on a dark Louisiana highway, a car carrying Jayne Mansfield and 3 of her children slammed into the back of a semi-truck on a dark Louisiana highway. The impact sheared off the top of Mansfield's car, instantly killing the 3 adults in the front seat, and miraculously the sleeping children in the back seat survived. And for decades afterward, a rumor circulated that Jayne Mansfield had been decapitated. And for decades, the rumor circulated that this 34-year-old blonde bombshell had been decapitated when the sedan she was in slammed into the back of a truck. But according to her undertaker, this was untrue. And the impact of the collision had caused Mansfield's wig to be thrown to the side of the road. And even in death, even in the moment that should have finally given her some dignity, the story told about Jayne Mansfield was wrong, was sensationalized, was designed to shock rather than to honor. The same way the story of her life had always been told, and the little girl in the back seat, 3 years old, who woke up in that wreckage, who survived something no child should survive, spent the next 30 years not looking, not searching, not asking the questions she was terrified to answer, because Mariska Hargitay grew up to become one of the most celebrated actresses in America, playing Detective Olivia Benson on Law and Order SVU for more than 2 decades. a character who helps survivors of trauma, and she had never fully confronted her own, Hargitay stated. This movie is a labor of love and longing. It's a search for the mother I never knew, an integration of a part of myself I'd never owned, and a reclaiming of my mother's story and my own truth. And in 2025, anchored by Hargitay herself, my mom Jayne powerfully navigates emotional recollections and buried family truths about the iconic Mansfield. With raw intimacy bolstered by never-before-seen photos and personal home movies, Hargitay's deeply emotional exploration dissects Mansfield's public and private personas as secrets are revealed and the siblings work to reclaim what has been painfully lost. And one of those secrets was the most personal of all. Mariska Hargitay revealed the identity of her biological father after a 30-year family secret, 30 years of not knowing who she fully was, because the story of who her mother was had never been fully told, and so this is who Jayne Mansfield really was. Not the poor man's Marilyn Monroe. Not the dumb blonde. Not the punchline. Not the headline. But a 3-year-old girl who lost her father in the back seat of a car and spent the rest of her life performing for a world that never quite gave her what she was performing for. She was a musician, a linguist, a comedian, a mother of 5, a woman of genuine intelligence and genuine ambition, who was handed a character by an industry that needed her to be simple, and she played that character because it was the only role on offer, and she played it better than anyone could have expected. And then one night on a dark highway in Louisiana, the story ended, and a 3-year-old girl woke up in the wreckage and spent 30 years building a life beautiful enough to honor the mother she never got to know. And then she looked, and she found her. Not the blonde bombshell, not the publicity stunt, not the photograph or the magazine cover or the sensational headline, but Vera Jane Palmer. The girl from Pennsylvania who wanted to be like Shirley Temple and became something the world had never seen before and never quite knew how to look at. This is Hollywood Untold Stories, and the real Jayne Mansfield deserved so much better than the story she was given. Jayne Mansfield was born April 19, 1933 in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. She appeared in 500 newspaper photographs in just 9 months in 1956 and 1957. She had 5 children from 3 marriages. She died June 29, 1967. She was 34 years old. Her daughter Mariska Hargitay was 3 years old and survived the crash. In 2025, Mariska directed the HBO documentary My Mom Jayne. The film was nominated for multiple Emmy Awards in 2026. The real Jayne Mansfield was never who Hollywood said she was.